I'm delighted to be here and delighted to see so many faces interested in building a business. I think that one of the most exciting things that is happening today is what is happening within businesses themselves. I know we're called the Skoll Centre for Social Entrepreneurship. As some of you have heard me say, if I could chuck the term social entrepreneurship out the window, I would. Because for me, all entrepreneurship needs to really have very much fundamentally ingrained in it its responsibilities and commitment to social governance and environmental challenges. And tonight what I'm going to do is the following. I'm going to give you a little bit of a sense of where this landscape is going. What do we mean by sustainable business? That buzzword of sustainability is also another one that has a lot of confusion around it because people think of environment immediately, but it's a host of other things. So what do we mean about sustainable business? The second thing I'm going to do is give you a couple of pointers, and these slides are going to be available to you, so don't worry if I'm going to rush through them, in terms of what are the things that you need to keep in mind if you want to go this route. And then the third thing I'm going to do is actually show you examples through videos of some truly remarkable sustainable businesses. These are some of them publicly listed companies. Some of them are getting there. All of them are focused on a very strong social purpose, but realize that that social purpose will never, ever, ever be fulfilled unless they are financially secure and unless they are, let's say, able to actually create a positive cash flow and many other things. So this is not about charity, although charities will always be incredibly important in our society because there are a lot of issues that don't get picked up by these businesses, and there are a lot of market failures where you cannot respond through markets. But I'm really focusing on what we call social businesses, or businesses that have these elements to them. So I'll introduce you to some of these people. The Emerge conference that Claire referred to really is the place for you to come to find out more about what's going on in that sphere. The other thing I want to emphasize is something that we talk a lot about at the Skoll Centre. Today, the buzzwords of entrepreneurship and innovation, frankly, are everywhere. Everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. Everybody thinks about innovation. When you think about innovation, you think, oh, that's the thought I had when I was in the shower. And, it's going to be the next big thing, etc. I want to convince you that you can be entrepreneuring wherever your career path takes you. And that you can be entrepreneuring within companies. You can be entrepreneuring, although it's a little bit harder, in the public sector. But you do not have to go and start your own business to actually be an entrepreneur, or to be a business. And not every business is an entrepreneurial business either. So with that in mind, I'm just going to jump right away to the presentation, and also a little bit to, I want to make sure that we have enough time, so I'm keeping my eye on the clock in terms of getting your questions and answers, and your answers too, or comments on the presentation. So I'm talking about not just being the best in the world, but the best for the world. And that is a recent thought. It's really fascinating to me to watch this movement. How many of you have heard of the B Corporation? The B Corporation is a global movement that was started in the US and is now all over the world, including in the UK, where what business leaders are saying is, we're not just driven by financial profit. We also want to prove that we are good for the world. And it is a certification process that businesses go through. There's no, there's no tax incentive, but they realize that this is really important in terms of giving a sense of mission, purpose for their talent that they want to retain, and also for their consumers. So if you have a chance, look at the B Lab or B Corporation, find out who those businesses are here in the UK, and you'll see quite a growth. Okay, this is where we were, and we still are in many parts of the world, is this division between here is where I make my money, and over here is where I do good. And the separation is really what has led us to many of the problems that we have in today's world. The separation between doing good and making money. Making money is fantastic. I can't say enough good things about it. But how you make your money, what you do with that money, and how you deploy it for the right reasons is absolutely critical. We're seeing more of a movement to bring these two things together. The other thing is, companies, as you know, typically the first phase was around corporate social responsibility. They'd publish this is what we're doing that's good for the company, and then they'd go off and oftentimes have completely, different trends going on. I can remember, for example, when I was leading a program on tobacco-free initiative to look at how do we actually arrest the consumption of tobacco around the world. And it was really interesting to me that one of the major foundations that you would all recognize today came to us and said, we love what you're doing. We want to give you $5 million to support the campaign that you're running. And I remember at the time being massively excited about this whole thing because I thought it was a great opportunity and we certainly needed the funding. And then one of my very clever, much cleverer than I was, members of my team said, hang on a minute, let's find out where this foundation is actually investing its capital. And do you know that 60% of its capital was invested in British American tobacco? So that is what I'm talking about in terms of separating these spheres. And if you ask them, they go, oh, but we get such good returns. We wouldn't be able to give you your $5 million if we didn't invest in British American tobacco. There's something definitely schizophrenic about that whole thing. Well, so today what we're saying is we actually want to future-proof business. You know why? For a big fat reason, because this is the new normal. The new normal is that we don't understand what the future holds. We do know one thing, that basically we're going to live in a hotter world. We're going to live in a world that is much more transparent thanks to internet technology, so people are watching what companies are doing around the world. Much more transparency around that. And it's much more unpredictable. You don't know what's going to happen next. And we see that every single day. So companies are really trying to figure out, how do we protect ourselves? What's the risk here? What's the risk of not doing anything? And I think that is something that's driving a lot of the reasons for re-looking at what is the role of business in society. So some of the most important and compelling arguments for why future-proofing business is important is because of the bottom line. Companies are finding out that actually doing this pays. In the short term, yes, it may not. It may actually, cause you to have more expense if you're going to completely put in a new way of getting your energy or whatever. But in the long term, over 5 years, 10 years, it pays off in spades. And this is actually some of the most compelling, studies, including here, will show this. But what is sustainable business? What does that mean? This is often defined as, how you manage financial, social, and environmental risks and obligations and opportunities. But that definition really needs to be expanded because it needs to capture more than just your nickel and diming for social and environmental impact. What you find is that even in this 2008 economic crisis, the businesses that were truly resilient were those that were embedded in the communities and that were actually doing the work in terms of incorporating into their DNA structure this idea of how do we develop a healthy ecosystem within our own company and support communities. So they've been able to survive these external shocks because they have these transparent governance processes in place that allow them to be more socially and environmentally accountable. So what do you need to know about building this kind of a business? And these are the assumptions that I have made about those of you sitting in this room. Might be right, might be wrong, we'll find out during the Q&A. I am assuming that you're interested not just in starting up a business or working for a startup. You want to have impact. You want that business to scale and to be bigger than the startup phase. So I am assuming that you want to address a problem with a wide impact, whether it's, you want to address a problem that's very focused on your community. That problem probably has manifestations in many communities. And so you want to be able to share those lessons and to enhance the impact that you have. The other assumption, the startup phase is the fun part. It's the easy part. Every entrepreneur, every successful entrepreneur that I know has been in there for the long haul. That's why there are so really few entrepreneurs in the world. Everybody wants to be one. But when push comes to shove, the persistence, the resilience, the stubbornness, the ability to take, setbacks, and the ability to hear that word that is most commonly heard among entrepreneurs, which is the word no, can't be done. That ability really, really is very rare in people. And it takes a certain kind of person, kind of a bit of a nutcase, really. Most of the entrepreneurs that I know are, they're interesting characters. It's a special kind of person. And so I think that that's important for you to recognize what it's going to take to be in there for the long haul. And you might be great at starting up, but then recognizing that, I'm not here for the long haul. Maybe I need somebody else. And as I said, it's a mixture of patience and impatience involved in every entrepreneur. The idea that I want to get it done, but I realize I can't get done in a New York minute. I have to pay attention to detail, but I want to look at the big picture. It's filled with contradictions. So just these assumptions that we can talk about. So what is the first thing you need to do? One of the things that we find at the Skoll Centre with this mushrooming interest in being an entrepreneur, when people come to me and go, what I'd love to do is be an entrepreneur. And I'm like, that's your first business mistake. You can't sort of all of a sudden become an entrepreneur. You have to really understand the problem that you want to address and to begin to think through what that problem is and understand that problem thoroughly. Too many times, and this is the mistake of much of entrepreneurial education, and we at business schools have fostered this through, this sort of quick fix, let's do accelerators, incubators, et cetera. And the idea is, okay, guys, you know what? We're going to have a competition, and we're going to give you a weekend to solve global hunger in Africa. Here's a 2-pager that explains it. Go solve it. These people have never probably been to Africa, and they certainly have never been hungry. The truly incredible, successful entrepreneurs are those who have lived the problem or thoroughly researched it, and that takes years. And we call that apprenticing with the problem. We don't do that enough. Unless you apprentice with the problem and truly understand it, and really understand what the problem is that you want to address, and get into it and research it, find out who the heck is working in that sphere, you're not going to be able to be successful. So whatever business you're trying to set up, make sure that you understand what problem you're trying to solve. Has this problem actually affected you personally? And if not, why is it that you're becoming involved? Why does that problem persist? What is it about the status quo? Why is it that this problem continues? If you look at things like Chinese foot binding or, female genital cutting, or all of these very, I'd say pernicious but very entrenched customs within those cultures and within our own culture, the issue of being too skinny or too whatever, well, I shouldn't be talking about that, but anyway, those issues are very ingrained in our cultures. Why does that problem persist? Understanding that and understanding the reasons for why that status quo goes on is important. Who else is trying to tackle that problem? I mean, I read so many business plans of people who are reinventing the wheel instead of finding out where are the partnerships that need to be leveraged. And what is special about your approach to that problem? What are the comparative advantages that you have over other people who are trying to address that problem? This is critical. Do people need what you are selling? Do you know how many times people come up with a product? They have no idea if there's a demand for that. I can't even tell you. Your product or your service must be demand-driven. How do you know? How would you know that it's demand-driven? Obviously, you need to go out and talk to people, right? A lot of people don't do that. Quite amazing. Are you going to have enough people to use it so that you can generate a positive cash flow? Is any other group, again, looking at, what is it special about your intervention? Is any other group doing it? Why are they doing it? And what is it about their specific thing that's making it, successful or not successful? And of course, if you are working anywhere in the world, is your product acceptable? Is it accessible? And is it affordable? And are people aware of it? You're going to find out in a couple of these videos that a lot of times these people had to do an awful lot of education about the product that they were selling before it actually was taken up. The very critical question. If your business disappeared, would anybody care? Except for you. Very important, especially in the pilot phase, you need to be able to establish some way of measuring your outcomes. This is something that I've found with entrepreneurs and innovators everywhere, that they have a passion and obsession with measurement. And this is very different from a lot of institutions that just feel we're doing good and so why should we measure? How can anyone question the impact of what I'm doing when I'm providing X or I'm providing Y to people who don't have X or Y? If you don't measure and track your outcomes, you will never be able to improve internally, and you certainly will not be able to mobilize resources because investors will not believe in what you're doing. So you must, from the very outset, decide what is it that I am trying to deliver? How will I know that I'm doing that? And these are tough questions. We ourselves in the Skoll Centre are going through that. How do we know that we are having an impact? That's a very tough question for an institution, for an organization within an academic institution. I mean, how do I know you all walk out of here and go, oh God, some of you will go, that was interesting. Some of you will go, oh God, whatever. But how will any educational institution know what the influence is? It's very difficult to come up with specific measurable outcomes or specific measurable metrics in that sense. I always used to laugh. Entrepreneurs are great storytellers. They have such a hard time condensing. They want to tell you their story from Adam and Eve. Well, when I was 5 years old, I looked at the heavens and blah, 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 and it goes on and on and on. And the thing is, entrepreneurs are really mismatched with investors because investors have very short time spans, like Sesame Street, bang, 1 minute. Whereas entrepreneurs are wonderful weavers of stories, and they want to convince you that what they're doing is the most wonderful thing. Getting those entrepreneurs to actually, or any business person, any one of you that's going to go into this, I hate the idea of a 30-second pitch, but I tell you, I've seen it work time and again, and figure out what's your story, what's the most compelling part of what you're doing, and it's no secret as to why so many of these entrepreneurial workshops, including what you'll see at Emerge, is about how do you tell your story? How do you tell your story in a way that's going to convince people that you are the most interesting, fascinating person and that your solution is it? That's key. So here's another one. In other words, do you have the right structures, the operating strategy, or looking at, what's missing? Is your model simple enough? And what do you need to do to be able to scale? Certainly in your startup phase, you're going to find out that it's, certain models operate, and then as you scale, you need to start changing. Today, you cannot do anything without technology. So whether you are, like some of the examples that I'll give you, a technology-based organization, we're seeing some fascinating business models come up in what we call the collaborative economy or the shared economy, which is totally disintermediating some of the mainstream players in the area of transport, hospitality, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are all technology-based platforms, which are fascinating to look at. But there are others that obviously use technology, like Ushahidi, that is, getting people to use mobile phones to report on emergencies in different places, many different applications. How will you maximize what you're doing through the use of technology? I always have to laugh at this. Oh, we really deliver impact. And we have, delivered impact for, 100 people who da-da-da-da-da. But the cost is astronomical for that one person. How much does it cost to make your impact per person? In other words, for one client, what are your fixed costs? What are the variable costs? What are the hidden costs? A lot of times we don't compute that. So those are key questions for you. And can your target client actually pay for what you're providing? Remember, you want it to be accessible, affordable. And many times people can. I'm going to show you a really interesting video of a fascinating new venture called MicroInsure, which has actually figured out how you deliver health insurance in a most ingenious way I've seen in ages. Are there enough people that are going to match the profile of that client to cover their costs? And do you have a sustainable financial model? Every entrepreneur I know, wherever, says this is the fundamental challenge. The fundamental challenge is getting human resources. Getting the right people, as has been Jim Collins writes in his book, getting the right people on the bus in the right seats. That is the hardest thing. And it's particularly hard, as we'll get into, when you are the founder of an enterprise and you want to drive it all. How do you delegate? How do you get people to actually become empowered in your team and deliver? So your team and selecting that team is actually critical. Are those people on your team as committed as you are to that mission and to what you're doing? Do they have the basic credentials or skills? You can't hire your brother or your sister or your mother-in-law or put them on your board. And that happens a lot. Get the right people on your team. And those people might change. This is another thing that, I don't know, I just, lose the will to live is the only way I can put it. When I read documents that have full with spelling errors, haven't done a spell check, I stop reading. Your team, your best team, has to have solid communication skills of all sorts. It can be IT apostrophe S or ITS, depending, that's a basic. I see misuse of that all the time. THEIR or THERE, misuse of that all the time. So I don't know if it's because we've gotten used to PowerPoints or speaking in, Facebook or whatever, but it's amazing to me how our writing and communication skills and oral seem to be really the crux of what we do, and yet continuously needing help. Do they have critical thinking and problem-solving skills, technical skills? Very important. One of the most impressive entrepreneurs I've ever known, whose venture scaled massively, said the biggest challenge for her was the culture, preserving the culture of the organization. That as you bring in new people, how do you prepare them to absorb the mission, the culture of that organization? And many times, if you look at the business world in the publicly listed companies that merge, that's one of the big tensions there, is merging the cultures. Not even, their financials or, their product or services or anything else. It's the cultures. It's the people in those organizations. And that's absolutely critical. This is important. Who are you? Do you have the qualities to be a business leader? Do you have the qualities that it takes to actually have an impact? Do you let others in your team lead? That's been a tough lesson for me. I shouldn't say lead. I'm a control freak, and many entrepreneurs are control freaks. They want to do everything. And being able to let go is the hardest thing to do. is the hardest. Learning for entrepreneurs to actually do teamwork is very difficult. Providing feedback, this 360 stuff, and going through, getting that kind of feedback, absorbing the feedback in a positive way, not taking it personally, not wanting to punch the guy's lights out because he told you something. That's really important too. And do you communicate regularly with your staff in terms of these things? Do you invest in measurement and evaluation? This is a tough one too. Honesty and transparency. Somehow, this is another thing. I mean, I'm a little bit jaded now by all of these conferences that go, let's celebrate failure, And you're like, failure's important. And we always used to, gild the lily and say, our whole thing around heropreneurs, and they can do no wrong, and all of a sudden, they're superheroes, etc. And learning from getting them to admit, well, we went wrong here, went wrong there, was actually very refreshing. But of course, because they're so popular and heroic, now they can admit to their failures without, any stigma. But getting us along the way to that level of humility where we can really see where we're going wrong and listen to others, that is a tough call. And I think, in a funny way, it's important to do that, but also to celebrate success. So as much as we talk about failure and the importance of failure, we also really need to celebrate our successes. Key here, this is another one. The big me, right? That's the title of one of the sessions in our Emerge conference. We seem to be obsessed with the big me. What about me, 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 me? So how do we actually begin to build up the rest of the team and be able to share in whatever glory you're having? This is next to impossible. I have yet to meet a successful entrepreneur that is having an easy time of exiting. Think, it's almost next to impossible, the entrepreneurs. And they're all aging because that's what happens to people, they get older. And at some point, they need to say, I need to prepare the next person, or my succession planning is the single biggest failure for successful ventures. It's very tough. And so, you have, and it's, whether you're completely commercial, or whether you're focused on, hybrid models or whatever, that kind of leadership that it takes, and the humility and the understanding that you won't live forever, you need to prepare the next generation, is absolutely critical. And entrepreneurs are not good at that. I think, certainly CEOs and folks that have been brought into companies to run big companies are much better at that because, they're in and out for, 4 or 5 years. But people who have started their companies, grown their companies, it's much harder. So that's something you need to be aware of in terms of your own self. Don't put your relatives on your board. Get people who really understand what it is and have bought into the mission and are going to be effective and involved. I am on too many boards. I've come down from too many boards. There's some boards that kind of go, oh, we just want your name. And you know what? Big mistake. I can understand the pressures for getting people who are well-known, and people go, wow, look at that person. Mohammed Yunus is on their board. Wow, look, Peter Thiel is on their board. Well, most of those people are not effective board members because they're way too busy. So you need to balance those names with people who are actually going to help you. And that's very important. Your board, your credibility, your ability to get mobilized investment is going to be really, really on the backs of those board members who are effective. So make sure you get a very solid board and make sure you meet with them frequently. I often hear about, there are lots of businesses out there, but they're not investment ready. They're not ready yet to take a sizable investment. This is the mantra of a lot of investors. And so they're only looking for the ones that have proven track record, et cetera. Who's going to fund those that are in the middle stage between the startup phase where there's money from accelerators and small, startup money, angels, et cetera. But that missing middle gap for when you're going to go from that point to the big scale, that's the big one. And that's why it's so important to make sure that you are investment ready when those people come. And what does it mean? Again, having that strong governance structure. It means that you have proven through your pilot that you have a strong market opportunity and that you have a solid business model and that you can show evidence of a positive cash flow and that you can demonstrate a feasible exit. The other thing, of course, is what's the climate in which you're operating. In some countries, it's going to be much more conducive to having a vehicle that's, investment ready. And if you're not in such a situation, how do you mitigate those big risks? Now, I'm going to show you a couple of examples of some of the folks. The first one is really interesting, waste management. You're going to hear from Dave Steiner, who's the president and CEO of Waste Management. It's the largest environmental solution provider in North America, and it serves more than 20 million customers. And you're going to hear about a company that is publicly listed, huge, and how it has pivoted in terms of what it does.
And Waste Management truly, at its core, is a company that drives sustainability. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about the overall goals that we have at Waste Management and how we're doing against those goals. We created 4 broad-based goals about 4 or 5 years ago, and here's what they are. First, we're the largest recycler in the United States, probably the largest recycler in the world. 5 years ago, we did about 6 million tons of recyclables. That's enough to fill the Transamerica building, I think, 50 times over. So as the largest recycler, we said, we have a goal to try to become even bigger, try to become even better. And so our goal was to recycle 20 million tons of recyclables by 2020. How have we done? So far, in the last 4 years, we've doubled the amount of recyclables from about 6 million tons to about 12 million tons. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit later about what we can do to drive that goal from 12 million tons to 20 million tons by 2020 and actually try to drive it over the long term even further than that. The second is to double the amount of waste-based energy that we produce. Folks don't realize this about Waste Management, but we, at the core, are a waste company. But one of the things that we actually are is an energy company. Now, when you think about renewable energy, you don't generally think about garbage. You think about things like solar or wind power. An interesting fact for you, Waste Management, just one company, Waste Management, we actually create more electricity from waste than the entire solar industry in the United States. The entire solar industry, and it's not even close. We produce about 2 to 3 times more power than the entire solar industry in the United States just out of waste. Our third goal is to reduce the emissions out of our fleet by 15% by 2020. Now, the good news here is that we've actually achieved this goal way ahead of target. This year, we've reduced emissions out of our fleet by 20%. So, as a CEO, what do you do when you meet your goal? Do you have a party and say, we're done? Yeah, you have a party, but you never say you're done. And so what we'd said is we're going to make a new goal, right? And I think by 2020, we can reduce the emissions in our fleet by over 50%. I'd love to see us reduce the emissions in our fleet by over 75%, and that's what we're going to be shooting for by 2020, to at least get 50% less emissions out of our fleet every year. And then the final goal that we have is a goal of turning all of the sites that we have throughout the United States. For years and years and years, we've been picking up waste and disposing of them in sanitarily safe landfills. Now, those landfills can't be used for development, but what can they be used for? They can be used for a lot of different things. We chose to make them into wildlife refuge. And so our goal was to have 100 of our sites, about 25,000 acres, turned into wildlife refuges. I'm glad to say that we've also exceeded that goal early. 134 of our sites, about 28,000 acres, have been certified as wildlife refuges. But, we don't want to stop there. We certainly don't want to take those goals and say we've now achieved them, we're not going to do any more. We're going to continue to do more, and we're going to continue to add to those goals. And, obviously those goals are laudable. But I recognize that when we look at the goals that we set at Waste Management, we look at them through the waste management lens, right? When you think about sustainability and you think about the networks developed around sustainability, we all look at the world through a particular lens. And there's really nothing we can do about that. But what we can do is to say, okay, I recognize that waste management looks at the world through our lens. And what is in our lens? You know, we're a for-profit company, obviously. We're a company that's built to serve our communities. We have the different lenses that we look through that are the waste management lenses. But I realize that the other networks that we interact with don't look at the world through the same lens. And so you can do one of two things. You can say, well, okay, they look at the world through a different lens. Let's forget about that and look at the world through our lens. Or you can say, how do we work with those networks to try to see the world through their lens? Because if you don't, that's where you get into the dangerous things that happen, whether it's at a company, at a government, or within a network. When you stop looking outside of your network to understand how people outside of your network view you and what you do, that's when you start to stagnate. And so what we've committed to doing is not only interacting with networks, but helping to build networks so that we can learn more about what the lens that other folks look at our business is, and we can then take that and shape it into what we look at for the strategy for waste management going forward.
This is all, I would encourage you to watch the video, because what they have achieved is quite astounding. Quite astounding. And that is what we're talking about, building at the core of the DNA, a sustainable company. Now I'm going to show you a different one, a very different one. And the interesting thing that I want you to take home with you is that these organizations are all operating in different industries. You've just seen waste management. Now you're going to see somebody that is turning around the insurance industry and getting mainstream industry, which is really exciting, to look at this whole thing in an entirely new way.
My name is Richard Leftley. I'm the Chief Executive of Microinsure. Microinsure creates a world of positive returns by providing low and middle income families with access to a safety net so that when bad things happen to them, they don't fall back into poverty. No one really wakes up in the morning wanting to buy insurance, but people wake up every day worried about the risks they face. And mobile phone companies have a problem in terms of the loyalty of their customers. So consumers are switching between different mobile phone networks. And we tried this idea of giving away free insurance in return for increased consumer loyalty. So if the consumer is more loyal, then they get access to increasing levels of free insurance. And by using this model, we've been able to sign up millions of people for the first time into using insurance. And today, we serve more than 15 million customers, and we're signing up 1 million new customers every month. We have to use behavioral economics to understand why someone would change their behavior, why someone would decide that actually now is the time to start to buy insurance. And looking at it through the lens of what are the alternatives, and understanding that actually the alternative, or in fact our greatest competitor, is doing nothing in many of the markets that we work in. And understanding that actually we need to provide something which is more compelling than just doing nothing has really helped us to rethink the way in which we're going to engage with the consumer, especially in the field of health insurance. The thing that really gets us excited in financial inclusion is scale. I mean, we are an organization which last year signed up 9 million clients in Africa in a single year. We opened 7 new countries. So these partnerships that we have with mobile phone companies have really enabled us for the first time to dream about how do we get to 10 million clients, which we exceeded last year, and then how do we get to 20 and 50 and 100 million clients. At Microinsure, we've been really lucky to work with some large organizations, some large partners, organizations like Airtel and Telenor and Barclays Bank. We found that partnership is the best way to provide access to the working poor, because it enables us to massively reduce the administration cost of selling and administering these policies on behalf of the poor. I think a lot of us have assumed that people just need access to financial services, and that if as an industry we come along and provide access, that's sufficient, that it's enough just to provide access. And so if you think about even the way in which it's presented, you know, the financial inclusion landscape, it's about including people, and that somehow that will meet the needs that they have. Actually, I think we have to go one step further than that. We need to actually understand what it is that consumers need. What are the risks that they face in their lives, and how do they want to deal with those risks? And unless we can understand that, unless we actually start very much from the viewpoint of what the client needs, then it's not sufficient to provide just access to these financial services. They actually have to be tailored around the needs of the clients.
Great. Now I'm going to show you. Has anybody heard of Zopa? Has anybody heard of crowdfunding? Oh, good. Has anybody heard of equity crowdfunding? Zopa is one of the first. And if you go to their website, they are pioneers in this. This fellow is sort of an interesting character.
Now, listen here. If you're dipped in super sensibility and are deeply smart cookies, sometimes you want to get extra money coinage for something like a motor caravanny broom broom. So don't be fretting once bloomers all in a twist. Here's a Zopa idea. If you have an impressively tidy credit rating, you could be borrowing the fiduciary funds from the truly remarkable old Zopa at zopa.com. Zopa lends pound amounts from $1,000,000 to 25,000. Spiffing glorious, all at a Zopa-petitive rate. Get your eyeballs trained on this absolute banger. And it gets even betterly splendid. It's all supersonically rapidly speedy to arrange, 2 oh-so-simple steps for a quote and a joyfully instantly decision. And no despicable costings, hidden all meanly, oh no. You savvy? Zopa duper. So, get on your computing or tablet pad web device and be gone to zopa.com and be applying right this memento.
In a world of nonsense, a Zopa loan makes perfect sense. Apply now at zopa.com.
How terribly Zopa duper.
Zopa actually is disintermediating banks. It is putting the lender in touch with the person who needs it. If you go on their website, you will see how they're doing this. It is absolutely fascinating. And they also have, they're under, here in the UK in particular, they've been real pioneers in this space. And they have also engaged the regulatory authorities that realize that this is a really great way forward. So it's worth looking at, again, in terms of those of you who are looking for a loan. I'm just going to give you a couple European examples. This one, and then I'm going to stop because, I could go on forever. Let me explain. How many of you heard of BlaBlaCar? How many have used BlaBlaCar? Can anybody tell me why it's called BlaBlaCar?
Because you talk.
Huh?
Because you maintain a discussion on that.
Because when you register with BlaBlaCar, and this is my favorite part, you can register as a blah, meaning you really don't want to talk in the car. As a blah blah means you'll engage in some conversation, or as a real chatterbox if you're a blah blah blah. So I find it, very cute, and it actually works. But it's the business model, again, that is of interest.
So this is Robin from Tech.eu. I'm here with Nicolas Bresson, who's the co-founder of BlaBlaCar. Can you explain a little bit about the company?
Yeah, sure. So BlaBlaCar is it's a long-distance or intercity ride-sharing network. So essentially what we do is we connect drivers with people looking for a ride, and typically we do that between cities. So if you take an example, in the UK, it would be a driver driving from London to Manchester would go on the website, offer his or her empty seat on the website, and passengers go on the website, search for trips, very much like they would search for a train ticket or a plane ticket, and they book the seats. Right. So essentially we end up building a new transport network based on empty seats in cars.
And how many users have you attracted so far?
So today, we passed 6 million users last month all over Europe. So in France, in the UK, Italy, Spain, Poland, Germany, and we recently expanded into Russia. And we've seen accelerated growth essentially in all these countries.
Nice.
And today, I guess we talk about the number of users. What we really track is actually how many people we transport or how many people we carry every month, and we passed over 1 million people actually using the service every month.
Nice. Do drivers actually make money out of sharing rides?
So it's interesting. People don't really make money. Essentially, they offset the cost, right? So we've set up the whole concept of BlaBlaCar around the notion of cost sharing. So essentially, if you think of the cost of driving today, it's higher and higher, right? So if you take the example of, again, London to Manchester, driving between those two cities would cost on average £90, so over €100 actually to drive between London and Manchester. So what we do is we allow drivers to offset that cost by offering their seats to passengers. So what's interesting is the driver doesn't make a profit. So in a sense, from a tax sense, from an insurance point of view, there is no issue. From a regulation point of view, there is no issue. I mean, you're just offsetting a cost. But yet, in a way, you're doing that trip anyway. So,
Right.
so in a way, yes, you make money, you offset a cost. So.
Right. So I'm guessing you make money by taking a cut of the transactions.
So that's right. So what we do is essentially the passenger is going to pay online, and we have a markup to the price. So we have like a small commission we add on top of that price, and we do that, essentially to facilitate the transaction. So what we end up doing is we do a complete yield management for the driver. So as a driver, you just offer you a seat on BlaBlaCar, and then we're going to send you passengers. You can accept or refuse those passengers, and if you accept, we're going to fill up your car.
Right.
And we also do that to some extent to create more trust in that network. So over time, we not only check your mobile number or your Facebook Connect, we end up collecting banking information from the driver, credit card information from the passenger, and we know exactly who traveled with who and when, and we have quite a bit of information about those members.
Makes sense. You're mostly based in Europe or operational in Europe. You just expanded to Russia and Ukraine, I think, via acquisition. Do you see yourself making the jump overseas to the US at some point?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we started with France a few years ago, and we took the approach to expand all over Europe pretty early on, right? So in a way, we started to expand in Spain, in Italy, even in the UK, before even making any revenue in France, which is kind of unusual because you tend to first prove your business model, and then when it's proven, you go abroad. We took sort of a faster approach. Initially, we wanted to really scale all over Europe, so we've done most of the countries by now. We've done the first move in a way outside of Europe with Russia a week ago, so it was, as you said, through an acquisition. We're pretty excited about Russia. I mean, it looks like a very interesting country for what we do. But I think more generally, we tend to realize that what we do is it's a pretty basic transport need, essentially. We're just creating this new transport network that's low cost, last minute, social, sustainable, because we're just leveraging empty seats in cars,
right.
which would be true in many countries. So talking about the US, I mean, the US is a bit of a different market in the sense that the economics of what we do are probably less compelling in the US than they are in Europe or even in Russia. So we're not in a hurry to do the US, but I would say long term, yeah, we'd like to do this thing everywhere we can, right?
Right.
So for me, it's more like a matter of time and execution.
Right. So you've been around a few years. You've raised, I think, about 12 million total so far. The last round was in 2011, so that's been a while. Do you see yourself raising more capital in the near future to grow faster?
So today, we're lucky enough that the model is, in essence, is quite profitable. Now, so in France it works pretty well, and we've been able to grow with essentially with what we raised so far. Having said that, it's always an equation you need to find between growth and becoming profitable. And today, as we see that the model works in more and more countries, it grows more and more in all these countries. Yes, of course, there will be a case to grow faster. And then it depends. I mean, depending on your pace of growth, yes, you might need to raise more capital. It might make sense to raise more capital. So there is no immediate plan for us to do that. But it's almost something you reconsider every 6 months or so.
What's your biggest problem, right? What keeps you up at night?
It's a good question. To me, our biggest challenge, I would say, is like awareness of the activity, right? So whenever we launch a new country, whenever we try to go to find the next users, people didn't do that like a few years ago. So when we launched France, it was new, right? Explaining to people that hey, you can actually share your car and you sort of sell your seats in a car between cities was a completely new concept. So every time we go to a new country, we have to educate the market. We have to do lots of educational marketing, lots of communication. And today, if we could crack, if we could accelerate that even faster, I think we could grow even faster. So for us, it's about like market creation, which is an interesting game, right? Because it's like, how do you educate people? How do you change behavior? And in a way, we change behavior. Right?
All right, Nicolas, thank you very much for joining us, and best of luck.
Thank you.
So I'd love to hear afterwards your experiences with BlaBlaCar. But do look at things like Elvis and Cressy. Elvis, they are competing with Louis Vuitton in the luxury goods market with a fascinating approach. Lelouch Kitty, is now here in the UK called the Food Assembly. So I'm telling you, all sorts of industries are now jumping on this bandwagon in terms of how do we actually marry profit with a great, with really being able to create a different kind of world. M-Copa, Lighting Up Africa, etc. Claire has spoken about Emerge. And I think this is just a note that I like to end on. It's Lars Dalgaard, who's a wonderful human being, even though he works in venture capital. No, I'm kidding. With one of the biggest venture capital firms in the world, Anderson and Horowitz. Read what he's saying. If you're not really committed to what you're doing, if you're not really passionate about what you're doing, whatever it is, don't even go there. Because you won't be able to actually make it through. You'll live in this world of constant frustration. And we've seen that again and again and again. So it takes courage. It takes real courage to decide, you know what? I'm not going to do X, even though all of my, and this is one of the things about entrepreneurs that I've learned, and change agents too. One of the biggest problems they have is the pressure from their family, their friends, etc., who say, are you crazy to actually go off and do them? These are people who have trained as medical doctors, lawyers, etc., and all of a sudden they wake up one morning and they go, I can't do this anymore. I have a different idea. And breaking with those expectations is probably one of the toughest things in terms of actually going after a dream that you might have. So the question is, when do you know that the dream is actually can become a reality? When do you know when to pursue it? When do you know it's time to quit? All of these questions, I have no answers for you. I just want to alert you to that. But these are questions that will continue to drive you forward as you build your business. And remember that every business today, if you don't have a really strong purpose and if you do not know your client base, you will not be successful. So I'd love to take your questions, comments, etc.
Hello, I'm Bryony Leatherbarrow. I would like to know if you could choose a PhD subject which would make a real difference from what you know from your centre and the work that you do there, what would the subject be?
My question to you would, why do you want to do a PhD?
No, I'm asking you what
Okay.
the subject that would be most useful.
I guess as someone who has a PhD, the most useful thing my PhD did for me was to give me, and it could have been, and I'm not making light of this, it could have been a PhD in underwater basket weaving. It could have been in, but it was the credibility. But okay, what's out there? I don't know, probably anthropology or something that would really give me a sense of, understanding peoples and cultures, etc. That for me would be interesting, but combining it with also business tools, because I think that one of the problems is that entrepreneurs, and certainly we see at the Skoll Centre, that don't have those basic elements of tools and skills around how do you run a business, no matter how committed and passionate they are, have difficulties. Yes, back there.
For the talk. I wanted to ask what happens if you are lucky enough to have a family member that does truly deserve to be on the board? And
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
Now? Can you hear me?
Yes, now, but speak loudly.
What happens if you are lucky enough to have a family member that is actually deserving to be on the board, who is both technically skilled and entrepreneurial?
Do I sense a family member that is... Look, I speak in generalities, so obviously there are always exceptions. But, look at how many successful family-run businesses there are. So, what I'm telling you is really, a general statement, but it's certainly not the norm. So, yeah, yes.
I guess my question is just, do you need to prove to investors, to people who might
You give them their bio and their achievements. That's enough. Yeah. Other than their achievements as being a relative. Any other questions or comments? How many of you are going to come to Emerge? 1, 2, 3, 4, anyway. It is a great way to invest your time, and I can promise you, you will leave a different human being. Thank you.